Hello everyone and welcome to the National Army Museum for this week's Friday Insight. The museum is the national home of the history and heritage of the Army, a place where you can experience the story of the Army from the perspective of those who have served in it. There are many ways to support the museum. You can buy a book in our shop, visit the cafe, donate or become a member where you can get exclusive discounts and your very own events programme. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Grant Bage. Grant is a writer, researcher, and educator. He's also an honorary fellow of the Historical Association and holds a PhD in history. His latest book, The Unseen Sir Alf, A Different Kind of Hero, delves into the life and career of England's most successful football manager, Sir Alf Ramsey. Grant will also be signing copies of this book afterwards, which is available to purchase in the museum shop, so I'll be whisking him away after this talk. Today, Grant will discuss the military service and the formative experiences of Sir Alf Ramsey. So there will be time for questions at the end of the discussion for both our online and in-person audiences. For our online audience, you can post questions in the chat bar, and these will be put to our speaker at the end of the talk. Moving on with some technical points, should we encounter any technical issues, please bear with us while we work to rectify them. If your stream freezes, we suggest that you click the refresh button at the top of your browser. That usually cures all ills. A member of our team will be active in the chat bar to assist you should you have any issues or queries. With that all said, I will now pass over to Grant and hope you will enjoy today's talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grant Bage. It's an absolute honour to be here. Thank you very much for coming in person, and thank you to the people who are watching online. And I know there are people from, Cornwall and Cheshire and all over the country. It really is an honour to be here. It's partly an honour to be here because I spent the last 6 years researching and writing a book that, as you can see from those quotes on the screen, takes a brand new look at an important figure in English football's history. And that's therefore someone who matters in how England sees itself now. This is a warning, health warning here. By the way, when I started out this research 6 years ago, I had no intention of writing a book. But the more I found out about Alf Ramsey, the more kind of puzzling and fascinating I found him. He became an even bigger but a different kind of hero to the one I'd first seen as a 9-year-old watching the 1966 World Cup final. Now, I won't embarrass you by doing a straw poll of, okay, who's old enough to have been watching that with me on our little tellies, and it was in black and white. But I know that some of you were, and even if you weren't there at the time, as I was and other friends in the audience were, you may well have seen it on TV later. Now, today, I hope we can kind of experience a taste of that together. But this being a short talk, and this being a 352-page book, there are things that I'm going to have to kind of leave out, things that are unseen about him. And they include some really important things. His racist childhood nickname from when he was playing football in Dagenham as a school kid, and that haunted him really for the rest of his life. The career-long rumours about his family coming from a gypsy traveller background. Being saved as a footballing teenager by playing Sunday football, which was then banned. His possible neurodivergence. His support in 1955, which was not known till the book's been published, for a player convicted in that year of homosexual behaviour. That's the year after Alan Turing took his own life. His hidden East London coaching experience, which I was just chatting to someone about, at Eton Manor from 1952 to 55. Never applying to manage the England job. There's so much that we don't know about this central figure in English football history. But what I'm going to focus on today is another, still largely unseen aspect of Alf's story, which people have not previously researched in archives. The 6 significant years he spent in the army during World War II and after. Now, sadly, I'm not about to reveal that Alf had a previously unknown stint in the SAS, or that he served undercover in the Secret Intelligence Service. But I do sincerely believe that without the army, Alf would never have even become a professional footballer, let alone England's only manager so far to have won a World Cup. So the session is going to last for an hour, the first 3/4 of which will be led by me and by pictures. Where there is historical text, evidence from Alf's life and times, that's indicated on screen by it being in italics. But don't worry, I will read out everything important to you, so you don't have to attempt to follow it on there. Just relax, listen, enjoy the pictures. And for anyone who might already have read the book, got a special treat. I mean, thank you for reading it. But this talk also contains bonus bits of new evidence about this chapter, either because there wasn't room in the book or because materials are still emerging. So, we're going to start off with some contexts. In 1946, after 6 years in the army, Alf was demobilised. Pictured on the left there, you can see the Dagenham Cooperative Society shop that he would have gone back to work in, which is still serving customers today. They do great Danish pastries. I've been there. We're going to revisit that summer of 1946 a bit later because, you know, England's greatest ever football manager nearly did not become a professional footballer at all. And he would not have done so were it not for the development he experienced in the army during 6 years. Meanwhile, that right-hand image is from a wonderful book by Paul Hayward. It's the biography of England football, 1872 to 2022. And it's a classic picture, snapped just after the final whistle has gone at Wembley in 1966, and England have won the World Cup. Hayward described Alf's non-reaction there. By the way, for anyone, he's in the centre, seated, looking a bit glum. Very typical Alf look. Paul Hayward describes this as classic English reserve prevailed. England had just won the Football World Cup, but Alf appears utterly impassive at the moment of victory. His self-control was almost military. Now, let's fast forward to this summer, the summer of 2025, and this is the 28th of July outside Downing Street, and it's a reception for the Euro-winning Lionesses. A rare moment of unity this summer, because it was followed by months of rancour featuring flags, boats, migrants, and national identities. Football is one of the few strands of Englishness that can still unite our country. In that context, telling the real story of Alf and 1966 becomes even more important. Now, here's the high spot. Here's the high spot of that whole story, and actually, probably of Alf's life. It's the 30th of July 1966, and this is how one relatively prestigious publication captured the key moments from the path to England winning the World Cup in a publication a week later. Featuring larger West Germany's late equaliser in the last minute of normal time, and Jeff Hurst's still controversial goal to make it 3-2. He went on later to score another goal that was less controversial to seal it at 4-2. Now, there's a headline there, England wins the World Cup. It's from the same publication. Triumph for Ramsey. But that headline is slightly misleading, because this is as good as it ever got for Alf. The actual text of the article, that's too small for you to see, but I'm going to read a bit out, described him rather differently, and his team rather condescendingly, as a dour, taciturn introvert, very unlike other football personalities. Until the closing stages of the Cup, Ramsey was a prophet without much honour in his own country. What the English lacked in skill, they more than made up for in spirit. This is from an English publication, by the way, in case anyone was wondering whether it was, a West German one or a Scottish one This is England's view of itself at that time, and England's view very much of Ramsey. Now, Alf had actually been cajoled by Bobby Moore and by some press photographers into taking this image of him kissing the Jules Rimet trophy, the World Cup. It's very unusual, for as a manager, Alf always directed the honour and the glory towards his players and not himself. Less exuberant, but more typical, is this image taken a few hours later after the game. Spoiler alert, there's a Prime Minister in there. Some of you may recognise that Prime Minister, some of you may not. So Alf's on the left. There's Dennis Howell, the Minister of Sport, in the centre, and on the right, as you look at it, is Prime Minister Harold Wilson. So this is the evening reception after the Wembley triumph, and this is classic Alf. Shy, socially awkward, his hand kind of hovers in front of his face, shielding him from scrutiny. But moments later, Harold Wilson, on the right, assertively took Alf by the arm and literally led him to do something Alf would never have done himself, which is to stand outside on a balcony to receive the cheers of an adoring crowd. 6 months later, Wilson nominated Ramsey as the first ever UK football manager to receive a knighthood. That's when he became Sir Alf in January 1967. Now, some of Alf's shyness can be explained by his modest background and his 1920 birthplace featured here. This kind of context is really important. Through our modern English eyes, this might look like a kind of multi-million-pound rural retreat. But in early English 20th century reality, the Ramsey family of 6 people lived in just 1/3 of this building. A childhood friend recalled it as little more than a shed. Even in 1952, 32 years later, when Alf was living there as a player at Tottenham, it had no mains water, no mains gas or electricity. In this single dwelling, the Ramsey family lived, but so did 11 other people. There were 17 people from 3 different families. Alf came from rural poverty. But the other important bit of context is that by 1934, everything had changed. This is Five Elms. The cottage you just saw is about 300 yards away. And this now is the Becontree estate. So Alf was born in 1920 in rural Five Elms, but by 1934 it had been transformed into a whole new town. Dagenham had grown from 10,000 inhabitants, Dagenham was the nearest local town, to 100,000. It was the biggest housing development in Western Europe. And it was in the arcade of shops, the new arcade of shops that you can see there, that Alf found 14-year-old school leaver Alf. He applied to the Ford's factory, didn't get in. He got a job at the co-op, at the shop that I pictured earlier. Now, through that shop, he found work, but he also found a way to play football. You can maybe, I've got Alf alert eyes, having spent 6 years with the guy, you can see him sitting behind the ball in the front row. The person in the coat on the right-hand side as you see them is Ted Grimmay. Ted Grimmay ran the newsagents next door to the co-op shop that we saw earlier. Alf did a news round for Ted Grimmay. Ted Grimmay saw all these young kids who couldn't play football because they worked on Saturdays. So Ted Grimmay started the Five Elms Traders, a Sunday football outfit. Alf had always loved football at school. It was terrible for him that he couldn't play, and he didn't play any football between the ages of 14 and 16. And then after 16, the only serious football he could play was on Sundays, but it was banned by the FA. Sunday football was not allowed until 1960. Alf, conventional Alf, was an outlaw in football terms. Undeterred by their illegal status, they had two teams by 1938-39, and they were winning things at Five Elms, playing in the Dagenham and Barking Sunday League. And Sunday football nearly nudged Alf into a higher level of football career. In August-September 1939, there was a lot going on. One of the things going on for Alf was this. Portsmouth, who'd just won the FA Cup, by the way, approached three of the players in Alf's Sunday League team to sign for them as amateurs. And these are Alf's own words from the only autobiography he ever wrote in 1952. Off home I went to show mother, father, and my brothers that a professional club, Portsmouth, was seeking my services. Well, as an amateur to start with. That night, the amateur forms were posted. Then I sat back and awaited the call from Portsmouth. It never came. So, Alf is aged 20. He's loved football. There's been times he hasn't been able to play it. He thought at last a professional club might be getting interested in him, but they never sent the forms back. And this is where we come to the army really saving his career. Now, on the 24th of June 1940, Alf tells us, Truro and an infantry training unit became my destination and the first step towards becoming not only a soldier but also a footballer. Remember, he's writing in 1952, 12 years after this. I boarded the Cornish Riviera Express for Truro and the British Army. And he's joining the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry Regiment. Now, previous biographies have relied on that 1952 autobiography by Alf, almost exclusively, really, to talk about this chapter of his life. We've been able to go further, thanks to museums and archives like this, and the Imperial War Museum and the National Archives, but also somewhere we're going to briefly visit now. Bodmin Keep is the museum most local to Alf's regiment, the Duke of Cornwall Light Infantry, but it's temporarily closed for structural building-related reasons. I know that some of the people there will be watching this online. But before that closure, which has happened in the last few months, this is a museum that's now reaching out and looking for a bit of help to do the work that's needed on Bodmin Keep itself, the architectural and structural work. But before that closure in the last few months, Keith Slyfield, who's here today, Keith, recently donated his father's army photos and documents to Bodmin Keep, which is Cornwall's Army Museum. So many thanks to him and to James Ingalls, who's the assistant curator there, for sharing with me some unique images, 8 of which now feature in this talk. They came too late to go into the chapter that's in the book, so this kind of really is fresh stuff that I found very exciting. So here's the first of those images, and thank you again to Ken, who was your dad. And here's the first of those images. At the centre in the middle row, Alf Ramsey's on the left, and I think, Keith, is that your dad on the right? It is, yeah, thank you, I thought it was. And below this kind of picture of this newly formed, these people who've just joined the army, is another little extract from Alf's autobiography. Until I travelled to Cornwall, the longest journey I'd undertaken was a trip to Brighton by train. He's 20. He's 20. He's only ever been to Brighton. I was indeed very much the lad from the country. To join the army was one of the greatest things which ever happened to me. I learnt in a few weeks more about life in general than I'd picked up in years at home. The army, in short, proved a wonderful education. As Alf recalled, for 3 months I was at Truro, learning how to be a soldier. The PT we were so frequently given added inches to my height, broadened my chest. In general, I became a heftier and fitter young fellow. I next found myself on beach defence at Penzance. It was then that we formed our first football team. Now, in the photo, of some such beach defence, Alf is at the back on the left, and I think Ken is at the front in the middle, yeah. Now, those 2 strands of barbed wire would not have stopped many German tanks, so let's not fool ourselves. But if you read the records, what's clear is that the battalion was involved in serious structural work, digging deep trenches, building massive scaffolding barricades, concrete groins, that they might have slowed invaders down for a few days or even a week or 2. But those structures obviously were not photographed for security reasons. So please don't think that this was those 2 strands of barbed wire were the beach defence. So here's that football team that Alf mentioned. These photos have never been seen before, other than by Keith and Ken and a few people at the museum. So there's that football team. Alf, again, seated at the centre in the middle row, and Ken to the right of him. More seriously, in the image on the right, Alf is at the rear of the 2 soldiers bayoneting dummies. This was Cornwall, but it was not a holiday. Alf is also at the centre of this image. Now, I know because I did my research 15 minutes ago by asking Tom. Thank you very much, Tom, who works here and is a bit of an expert on guns. That's a Bren gun. And Alf is sitting, he's the one seated, and it's pointing towards the sky. And I know that to post-war generations, this may look a bit Dad's army, but it was deadly serious. German aircraft bombed Cornish military bases at least 8 times during 1940 to 42, and killed and wounded battalion members of the same battalion as Alf. It was also incredibly heavy, Tom was saying. So Tom and I, we worked out that was probably sort of part of the tripod type arrangement. You had to be incredibly strong to be able to fire this gun, and you couldn't fire more than 3 bursts because the barrel got so hot. I'm not an expert on military history, but I'm learning, and it's fascinating to see these new details of Alf's military service. Interestingly, given Alf's lifelong obsession with football, there are 11 armed soldiers pictured here on this pillbox in a Cornish cove. You can see the cove in the background. That section includes by now, I think he's a Lance Corporal Ramsey, who's second from the right on the front row. He has a single stripe on his arm. Some of you have probably played in pillboxes, seen them, visited them. I don't know if this one's still here. I'll be fascinated to see. Here he is in another team of 11 at the back and to the right of the goalkeeper. We don't know exactly when this was taken, but it pictured the 6th Battalion team for season 1941 to 42. These soldiers had done essential work in Cornwall for over 2 years. Maintaining morale and keeping fit through football and other sports was a sort of byproduct. But for Alf especially, his footballing skill and leadership were given opportunities to grow. Then in early 1943, the battalion left the county of Cornwall and moved about 175 miles east. As Alf later summarised it, a battalion side was organised, and to my surprise, I was made centre-half and captain. After this, I made the usual rounds, moving from one camp to another, and finally came to rest at Barton Stacey in Hampshire. By now, I'd become a sergeant in the AA anti-aircraft. Our commander, Colonel Fletcher, it's an important name, encouraged football as much as possible. So, in August 1943, Alf's moved from Cornwall nearly 200 miles east to Hampshire. He's aged nearly 24, and he finally played a match against football professionals. You can perhaps see from that game's programme, pictured on the left, and thanks to Duncan Holly, the Southampton historian for this, that Alf has indeed been made a sergeant and captains the army team, as his autobiography described that passage. In due course, our team became even stronger, and in 1943-44, as part of their pre-season practice matches, Southampton invited us to meet them at the Dell. Every time the Southampton forwards took a shot, the ball seemed to flash into the net. A 10-1 victory. We must have shown promise, however, for the following week we were invited to play once more against Southampton reserves. This time we had our revenge, winning 4-1. Now, 6 days after that game, as Alf recalled on the left-hand side of this slide, he was ordered to Colonel Fletcher's office. Had he done something wrong? No. When Alf arrived, Fletcher told him, "I've just had a telephone call from Southampton Football Club. They're short of a centre-half for their first team tomorrow. Would you like to play for them?" This phone call is absolutely pivotal. But did Southampton call Colonel Fletcher, or did he call them? In the 1979 newspaper story on the right there, the Southampton manager described receiving a phone call from the Duke of Cornwall Light Infantry, not making one himself. Either way, Colonel Fletcher's personal and professional encouragement for football in his battalion was absolutely central to Alf's development, from age 20 through to 24 and beyond. So, in September 1943, Alf signed for Southampton as an amateur, 4 years after posting the same amateur forms to Portsmouth but hearing nothing back. Yet Alf's amateur spell with Southampton, the reserves and the first team, lasts only 3 months. For a war is raging, and nothing is linear. This photo shows an extract from the battalion's war diaries held at the National Archives. By January 1944, the battalion had been sent north, and Alf went with it. No more football. In March 1944, most of Alf's battalion returned from County Durham and Northumbria to Barton Stacey again in Hampshire, then moved to Salisbury near Southampton. There, they set up and ran embarkation camps for D-Day, like the one pictured here, something they'd trained for in autumn 1943. After D-Day, in late summer 1944, the battalion moved again to Shoreham, then to Hove. All this meant no club football for Alf from December 1943 until August 1944. More importantly, in the battalion's war diaries, Colonel Fletcher referred to such duties as the embarkation camps as a somewhat uncongenial but most necessary task. And his commanding officer, in a letter of thanks to him, called them a heart-breaking job. Alf's battalion was preparing and caring for soldiers in the final days and hours before some of them faced certain death. Then, as can be seen in August 1944, in the text there, some occasional professional football at last resumed for Ramsey. Just before the opening of the 1944 season, I was posted back to the Southampton district and became a member of the Saints' professional staff at £2 a match. Now, Alf is nearly 25 years old, and for the first time ever being paid to play football games. But it is only games. He's not training as a professional footballer every day, or even any day. He is employed by the army and expected to fulfil military duties, fitting in football around them. Hove is over 60 miles from Southampton. These were guest appearances. Nevertheless, 1944-45 saw Sergeant Ramsey playing in a side that attracted some admiration, as in this January 1945 Forces newspaper article headlined, "Surplus of Soccer Stars." Southampton, who have shaped up well at times this season, are typical of this new spirit. 8 of their side are youngsters picked up from junior teams. They've graduated through the reserve side. That season, Alf did indeed have some wartime league games. He played at Chelsea in September 1944. He played at Arsenal in December. He played at Tottenham in January 1945, and of course at home, the Dell at Southampton. In March 1945, Southampton beat Luton 12-3 in the League South Cup, which tells you a bit about the kind of quality of some of this football. It was very haphazard stuff. And Alf scored 4. Equally, Southampton's grandstand had been bombed, the pitch was hard and uneven, and Alf rarely had a chance for sustained training with teammates. It was a very haphazard sort of professionalism. Then, season 1945-46 once again proved problematic for Alf. During May-June 1945, his battalion had been training for jungle warfare to fight Japan. August's atomic bombs negated the need for that, but the battalion then started preparing to go to Palestine, sailing from Southampton in December 1945. Alf recalled, "Shortly after my arrival, I was elected captain of the Palestine Services 11, a most useful side." Indeed. I mean, what you can see on the right-hand side of this slide is a hybrid team sheet stroke programme for a fixture against the 6th Airborne Division on the 28th of February 1946. Militarily, for Alf and his battalion, those 6 months in Palestine were comparatively uneventful, but I think about 750 British soldiers lost their lives in Palestine during this extended period. But football, for this battalion, helped them to pass time and maintain morale. Now, Alf leaves Palestine in June 1946 and returns home to Dagenham for his demobilisation leave. He's still formally in the army, but he's just about to leave. He gets a letter from Southampton asking him to meet the manager at Waterloo Station, who offers him the chance to turn professional at £6 a week. £6 a week. As Alf's autobiography describes on the right here, he rejected the idea. I've never been a fellow to rush a decision, but that afternoon I did not need second thoughts, as my firm had offered me back my old job behind the counter in the local cooperative stores. I was not so sure I wanted to become a professional footballer. When I left the Southampton Chief, it was with a determination to return to my old job at the end of my DMOB leave. Luckily, Southampton changed their mind and Alf accepted £1 a week more. £7 a week for the first time to be a properly professional footballer playing full-time in a proper professional league. He never looked back. In 1948, he debuted for England, and in 1950, he gained the 7th of his England caps at England's first ever World Cup. Now, that photo shows Alf earning that 7th cap, but it was not a lucky number. In one of the greatest ever World Cup shocks, the USA's, we've heard it before, haven't we? We'll probably hear it again. The USA's part-timers beat England 1-0. Another 1-0 defeat to Spain knocked England out, humiliating them in their first ever World Cup tournament. England had never deigned to join the World Cup before. This was their first tournament in Brazil in 1950, and they get beaten by the USA's part-timers. So, the fact that Alf bounced back 16 years after this to manage England to win still their only World Cup showed he was made of stern stuff. A strength of character developed, I believe, during his 6 years in the army. As the italicised text from my own book suggests, Alf's football career path was highly unusual, probably unique. Scrutinising the professional background of the other players in that England World Cup team versus the USA, all of the other 10 had either played professionally pre-war or been involved with a professional club before conscription. Alf's professional career was the only one solely enabled by the army. So, the final section, and in this last section of the talk, I'm going to highlight aspects of Alf's management mindset and leadership style that, to me, also seem rooted in his army years. Alf, being Alf, famously tight-lipped and taciturn, almost never talked about himself or what influenced him. But if you know anything about the England team that won the 1966 World Cup, you may recognise a few names who do offer us observations of Alf as a manager, and they'll be coming up shortly. But evidence of Alf's army-influenced leadership journey starts back in the late 1940s. So, on the left, here's a photo from 1946, the end of Alf's army career. Colour Quartermaster Sergeant Ramsey is captaining the battalion's football team. Only 4 years separate that picture on the left with the newspaper report from 1950 on the right. There, the Liverpool Echo tells its readers about the Tottenham team visiting Liverpool that Saturday and how its outstanding right back owed everything to the army. Ramsey became a sergeant in the DCLI and leapt to prominence in army football. So Alf's debt to the army was publicly known throughout his footballing career. Whilst at Spurs, he was there from 49 to 55, Alf also soon earned a new army-related nickname. The 1950 Huddersfield newspaper on the left admiringly described Alf refusing to kick the ball aimlessly upfield. No wonder his club mates have termed him the General. By the way, now, what the newspaper doesn't say is that I know from reading lots of books and accounts of the time, that several of Alf's Spurs teammates found him incredibly annoying. obsessive, bossy, hyper-focused, and over-friendly with the manager. The general, as a nickname, may well have been them taking the mickey. But the nickname persisted into 1966. As we can see in the magazine story on the right, which was written by Billy Wright, who had over 100 England caps, and he'd been a favourite for the England manager's job when it came up in 1962, but Arsenal signed him as their manager just before the England vacancy arrived. Wright described Alf as, he is a player's manager who only lets down the guard in the company of his players. With them, he is once more the general, analysing, anticipating, encouraging, planning, prompting. But Alf's army influences ran deeper than nicknames. For example, in December 1942, a solemn ceremony had renamed Alf's 6th Battalion the 1st DCLI, 1st Battalion. And that happened because in summer 1942, most of the 1st's original members, who were regular army members, not conscripts, were killed, wounded, or captured in North Africa. This photo of that ceremony in Cornwall in 1942 entailed the 6th Battalion, which was the one the conscripts were in that Alf was in, literally taking on the 1st's battle flag. The speech accompanying that 1942 solemn handover from a senior commander urged an attention to duty and discipline that was later mirrored in Alf's football management. "Nothing but the best," he said to the assembled soldiers, one of whom was Alf. "Nothing but the very best shall be good enough for you to give, when whether in battle or in peace, in your discipline or your turnout, in training or in sport, then, and only then, will you prove worthy of this great inheritance." This was an inheritance from the dead to the living that transformed them from the 6th Battalion to the 1st. It's a serious, solemn business. "20 years later, here is solemn, loyal Alf, photographed in October 1962. It was taken 2 days after England had appointed him. And he's out with his Ipswich players on a pre-match Friday night. I mean, being a professional footballer in 1962 was incredibly glamorous. On the Friday night before the game, Alf took his players out to the cinema. He did this, by the way, with the England players all the time as well. And there he is in the centre. Of course, like probably most of us would be, with his eyes shut. Because that's how it goes, isn't it? So for Alf, loyalty was paramount. He only accepted that England job 2 days earlier on condition he could stay with Ipswich Town until the end of that season. So from January to April 1962, he's doing both jobs. He's managing a First Division football club, a Premier League club, and he's managing England. The same evening that photo was taken, John Arlott, famous cricket commentator, a name that many of you will know, interviewed Alf about becoming England manager. And this is what he reported about Alf's motivations for doing so. Basically, it matters to him. A devoted player for his country, he has the same attitude to his new appointment. Intensely, honestly, without raising his voice. It's exciting. I want to do it. You see, I believe in England, an Englishman, as well as English football. Let's find another army football parallel. Alf was one of the handful of his battalion's colour sergeants, positions by the end of his career in 1946. Positions awarded only to those of unquestionable loyalty, who, if necessary and in theory, would die defending the battalion's colours. That's why they're called colour sergeants. Alf's serious leadership style reflected that, and during spring 1946 in Palestine, he was observed by another soldier. We don't have many reports of Alf's army colleagues, so this one, published in the regiment's journal on the left there, is especially valuable. So they'd been out to Palestine, and a new team had to be trained, but things improved, and CQMS, Colour Quartermaster Sergeant Ramsey, has been an excellent team captain. His half-time talk to his men is always a remarkably effective institution. To those of us on the touchline, this ceremony looks like a very serious religious ritual. Now, that serious leadership style was repeated 20 years later, just before extra time, in the World Cup final at Wembley on the 30th of July 1966. His assistant, Harold Shepherdson, recalled in his 1966 diary that Alf told the England team, "You've beaten them once, now go out and beat them again," because it's 2-2 with that late equaliser. Nobby Stiles, George Cohen, Sir Geoff Hurst and others recalled Alf's words similarly, even though they have been disputed in detail later and sometimes misinterpreted as rhetoric. But what is clear is that nothing much had changed in Alf's management demeanour since his 1946 army efforts in Palestine and 20 years later at Wembley. But Ramsey's army management was about solidarity, not rhetoric. Despite his nickname of the General, it seems to me that he actually always remained the sergeant. He only ever relaxed when with his players, and even though he always stayed in command, at least they felt he understood them. As an ex-professional who had experienced a tortuous route to his own playing success, Alf was one of them, battle-hardened in succeeding at football. As two of his 1966 players recalled, this is Alan Ball, who featured in the final, he wanted us to love each other. I remember him saying, "A general can't win wars, and neither can foot soldiers, but together they might." And this is Norman Hunter, who played for Alf nearly 30 times, was in the 1966 squad, but not in the team. Alf studied his men as an army commander does. Here, Sir Bobby Charlton refers to how Alf imposed his ambition and his vision of how it might happen upon every player in the 1966 squad. Looking back, it's clear enough that he was in the grip of an obsession, one that he was intent on spreading into every corner of the squad. At times, he might have been a sergeant major, measuring out a parade ground with his yardstick. Now, you'll recognise this image on the right from a previous slide. British soldiers just before D-Day embarkation. My hunch, as yet with no direct supporting evidence, is that Alf's relentless ambition and discipline was fuelled partly by survivor guilt. His battalion was involved not just in preparing D-Day troops before embarkation in early June 1944, but also in rehabilitating and retraining soldiers afterwards, some of whom had seen intense combat in France, been returned to England, and were now being sent back to the war zone. The psychological import of that is absolutely massive. Bobby Charlton's 1966 World Cup training camp observations in the box on the left perhaps support my hypothesis of Alf's survivor's guilt. We reported for duty, a phrase I do not use lightly, appropriately enough, on the 6th of June, the 22nd anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy. Our lives were not at risk, of course, but Alf had made it abundantly clear that our reputation for competitive honour and patriotism was. Alf's intensity is evident in this image on the left from 1941 to 42, but it persisted lifelong. Of the 11 players in the 1966 World Cup final, England team, during his time as England manager, Alf had disciplined or severely reprimanded 8 of them. Anyone who showed indiscipline, laziness, sloppiness, or lack of ambition either never made it into Alf's squads or was rapidly dropped. Even 2 eventual World Cup winners he loved, Nobby Stiles and Alan Ball, received an absolute tongue lashing on the 6th of June 1966. They just arrived for the World Cup warm-up training camp, and 3 players, including Ball and Stiles, slipped out for a pint. Alf simmered for a moment, then rasped, "All of you, get out of my sight!" Alf had reached a fine point of disciplinary zeal. I better introduce this, I suppose. This is Geoff Hurst. You may have heard him. As a 9-year-old, I watched Sir Geoff score 3 goals in the 1966 World Cup final. I was in Scotland, and I was watching it on a tiny black and white TV. Anyone who's old enough to remember will have their own memories of the room and the people they were with of watching that 1966 final. But it was therefore the honour of my life earlier this year that Sir Geoff gave me the privilege of a 40-minute telephone interview. Now, in it, he told me how he was, this is his words to me earlier this year, still struck over 60 years after first meeting him, about how when recruiting him to England, Alf probed not so much about my football skills as trying to find out what sort of person or character I was. Hurst also heard Alf on several occasions describe player selection as seeking people who will not let me down on the day. It was also my privilege, whilst researching this book, to read nearly 200 letters to Alf. Don't worry, I'm going to... It's quite small handwriting on the left. Don't worry about trying to read it. So I read nearly 200 of these to Alf, and they date from the summer of 1966, and incredibly, they've survived at the FA. And I want to thank Jane Bateman, who I know is watching online, for her help at the FA with accessing these. Wonderful, wonderful snapshot of kind of public views. I quote from many in the book, but at least 3 of them, there's about 175 from England, the rest from Europe, 3 of them were from old army comrades. The one pictured and quoted from here was written by Walter Edwards. He was a regular soldier in the DCLI who in the 1950s became Cornwall's army recruiting officer. It seems likely he was a survivor from the old 1st Battalion wiped out in North Africa in summer 1942, whose colours were handed to Alf Ramsey's 6th Battalion at Helston on the 9th of December and transformed them into the new 1st. In the letter, he offered Alf congratulations for the wonderful performance in winning the World Cup. Like all old soldiers of the regiment, I've always followed your great football career since I last saw you in Cyprus. I was then quartermaster. I'm sure old friends Colonel Fletcher and Major Lane have been as much impressed as I have in the wonderful example you've shown in management, and above all, sportsmanship. It makes me proud to have served with you from 1942 at Helston. Sincerely, Walter Edwards. But I think this letter that we're going to finish on would have meant as much or even more to Alf, and I think offers this talk in this wonderful setting a fitting finale. My dear Sarge, I felt compelled to drop you a note to tell you how delighted I feel at your very great success. It's a far cry from Penrose Station anti-aircraft platoon, and I think Inside right for the battalion side? More power to your elbow. Sincerely, E.W. Bunn. Thanks so much for coming today. We're going to have some questions and answers now.